No matter what type of business you are managing with Farmbrite, you'll probably want to know what you're spending on expenses and how much income you're bringing in. That means you'll want to record transactions on each side of that ledger and have them automatically totaled to calculate a profit or loss. You might be spending money on livestock feed, plant nutrients, equipment maintenance, and many other things. You might generate income by selling livestock, distributing produce in a CSA share, or even through government grants and loans. Farmbrite can keep track of all of those transactions and then generate reports to show you a summary by category. You can even customize those categories to track what's important for your business. You'll see many of the features that we just outlined under the accounting section of the left-hand menu. You can record your transactions here and then run different reports to see your totals. You'll also have a balance sheet here for tracking your liabilities and assets, and a budgeting tool to help you plan for the year. Before we go through each one of these, I want you to know that we'll take a look at these features at a high level in this video, but if you want more in-depth instructions, you can take a look through our help articles for step-by-step walkthroughs and tutorials for all the different accounting features. Now let's take a look at the transactions page. This is where you can record transactions, and it's also where you'll see a list of previously entered transactions. We've added various income and expense examples in this account, things like agricultural program payments, expenses for utilities, animal feed, and veterinary care, the sale of produce, expenses for our farm equipment, other various supplies, and the sale of livestock. All of the income and expenses are totaled, showing us revenue, expenses, and then calculating a profit. You'll also see them visually represented at the top of the page with a monthly income versus expense chart and a yearly expense category breakdown. You can easily search for transactions on this page and also filter them using all of the criteria here. Maybe we just want to see the transactions that we've allocated to our chicken feed category. It's also very easy to reset these filters and go back to your starting list. Now let's take a look at creating a transaction. You'll first choose if the transaction you'd like to add should be an expense or an income transaction. You can then supply an amount and add who you paid for the expense or who paid you for income. Then we'll need to categorize the transaction. Your Farmbrite system comes with many default categories that you can use to track your expenses and others for your income. In addition to those, you'll also be able to customize a chart of accounts to create whatever categories work well for your business. Let's take a look at how you can do that now, as you'll likely want to think through the chart of accounts and create any custom categories you need before you start entering transactions. We'll also take a quick look at reports in this next section, as seeing how these categories are used in reports can help you put the pieces together for how you'll get the most out of the Farmbrite accounting system. To do this, you can navigate to Account, Chart of Accounts, and then set up whatever custom categories you'd like. Notice that all of the default categories that we just saw on the transaction screen are included below on this page. If you don't think you need any of these, you can start from scratch, but if you think you have use for most of them, and maybe just want to make some changes or add a few more, then you can choose to customize default categories to start with them as the basis for your custom categories. Once added, you can edit any existing category or add new ones. You'll give the category a name and then choose whether it's an expense or income category. We're adding chicken feed here, which is obviously an expense, and we're going to associate it with the already existing parent category of feed. Making this connection means that any transactions that we associate with the chicken feed category will also be included in the totals for the feed category. And the next field, tax line, kind of works in the same way. Now you can create whatever custom categories that you want to track within the Farmbrite software, but you probably still have tax reporting obligations to classify income and expense in certain ways. The tax line that we add here will tell Farmbrite to associate expenses in this category with this tax line on your tax summary report. You'll see in a minute how we can add this same tax line to multiple categories and then combine them into that one row on the tax summary report. We can also add an internal accounting code here as well. So if you already have an accounting system structure in place for your farm operation, you can add that internal code here. And we're going to save this category And then we're going to immediately add another, and that one's going to be for cattle feed. Everything we just talked about is applicable here as well. It's an expense. We're going to put it under the parent of feed. We're also going to add it to that same tax line 16. And we're going to use a different internal accounting code and then save that. So now you can see that we have one parent feed category and then two child categories for chicken feed and cattle feed, and see that all three of them are associated with tax line 16. Now, when we navigate to reports and run the profit and loss statement, we'll see separate sections for chicken feed and cattle feed transactions, and then a total for feed overall. And to see how those tax lines come into play, let's run our tax summary report and see our total for line 16. So now you can see that it's easy to get both the internal breakdown that you care about between cattle and chicken feed, but also remain compliant with your local tax laws and report them all together as a feed expense. So now that you've seen how to customize the chart of accounts and the reporting impact that the category selection will have on your transaction, we can continue with our example and categorize this expense as supplies. The next choice that we have is to associate this transaction with a particular animal, crop, grow location, or piece of equipment. Maybe some of the supplies we bought were hardware and fencing material for one of our fields. We could associate that expense with that particular field so that it would be included in the expenses allocated to that grow location and be added to the total expenses for that field. Or maybe it was bedding for one of our cows. Or maybe trellis and netting for our peas decline. Or maybe something for our tractor. This field isn't required. You don't have to select a record to associate the transaction with. But if you want to keep very detailed records and have individual accounting for your unique equipment, animals, crops, and fields, you can associate the transaction with any of your records. Let's navigate over to one of those records so that you can get an idea of what the individual record accounting looks like. You can navigate to any of those records and choose its accounting tab to see a list of income and expense transactions associated with it. And just like the accounting dashboard that we just saw, you'll see the revenue, expenses, and profit totaled in the area above the list of transactions. From there, you can choose the P&L statement link to get a profit and loss statement specifically for those transactions associated with this record. This chicken flock is a great example of this. You can see that we're accounting for costs like initial purchase price, feed, and vet visits, and then also see income from some hens we've sold and the sale of eggs at our farm stand. And of course, you'll have a similar accounting tab on your grow locations, on individual crop types, and on your equipment. Okay, so now you know how to categorize a transaction and associate it with a record. But what if one transaction needs multiple categories or multiple records connected to it? Maybe we went to the supply store and picked up some livestock feed, but while we were there, also got nutrients for our plants, some hardware that we needed, and of course, some of the amount that you paid probably needs to be allocated to taxes as well. Well, let's take a look at how you can use the split transaction button to record one transaction, but break it down into multiple categories and connect it to multiple records. The first thing that you choose here is if the transaction is income or expense, and then you'll supply an amount for the transaction overall. You're going to split this total amount into multiple smaller transactions, each categorized in their own way. So this is the total amount that you want to record. You can put in who you paid if this was an expense, or record the customer if this is income. And then you can leave the main category dropdown blank. We are going to use the split transaction button to turn that $100 into multiple transactions in multiple different categories. Now you can split by amount or percentage. If you have a receipt and you just want to type in the different amounts, that's great. Or if you wanted to put 40% to one category, 50% to another category, and 10% to the remaining category, you can do that too. It's all up to you. In this case, we're just going to put in an amount. Now that first $42.75 is going to go into our chicken feed category, and then we'll associate it with our chickens as well. Associating the transaction to this animal record is going to put that transaction on that animal's accounting tab and individual profit and loss statement. It'll help us know that this $42.75 was specifically spent on that chicken flock. And then we create, and you can see here that Farmbrite has calculated the difference between the transaction we just put in and the overall $100, letting us know that we still have $57.25 to account for. And to do that, we'll click on Add Another Split, and now we'll put in our $23.75 that we spent on fertilizers and lime. This is going to be associated with our pepper plants. We'll create that. And now we have $33.50 remaining to make up the $100. We'll add another split, put in $24.75. This time we're spending that on repairs and maintenance. And this was associated with some fence repairs in Northwest Field A. We create that. We still have $8.75 remaining. That's going to be one more split. And we're going to put that into taxes. We'll create that. And now we see 0 remaining. We'll also go through and add an attachment. We're going to attach our receipt here so we have a copy of it, and then update our transaction. And now that transaction is split. Note the icon pointed to on the screen letting you know this is split into multiple categories, as opposed to the one above it for cattle feed or the one below it just for chicken feed. So you've seen all of the unique ways that you can customize the transaction. You can define your own chart of accounts for unique categories. You can associate the transaction to a record, or split it to assign it to multiple categories and multiple records. All of those features give you an extra level of detail and tracking for your transactions, but they're not required. We know that sometimes the transaction can be very straightforward and doesn't need those additional features. At a minimum, we'll choose one of our standard categories for this transaction, and that meets all the requirements to save it. We've chosen that it's an expense, we've added the amount, selected a category, and have a date associated with it. Before I create the transaction, I do want to go through the other fields here really quickly. You can choose a reporting year for the transaction. This controls what year this transaction shows up on for your reports. This could be really useful if you were buying something in the fall that was really going to be used next spring, and thus should be accounted for as an expense in the next year. Now, if you paid by check or someone paid you by check, you can also record a check number here, and you can add some keywords to search by. You saw previously that we could search the transactions list. If there's something you want to search for that's not the category or the customer, you can write that here. And if you wanted to supply some additional information, you can write a quick description as well. And lastly, you saw when we split transactions that you can add an attachment. If you want to upload a picture of a receipt or maybe a PDF file, you can do that here. If you had more than one transaction to create, you could click Save and New and then create your next one. In this case, we'll just create this, and we'll see that transaction added here. In addition to recording the transactions individually, if you have a lot of transactions to add, be aware that you can click the Actions button and import your transactions. This might be helpful if you've recently switched to Farmbrite and you wanted to add transactions that had previously occurred this year. Or perhaps you wanted to download a file from your bank and import all of the transactions that way. The best place to start is to download our CSV template. This import template comes preloaded with the correct column headers to accurately map your data into Farmbrite. You'll see things like the type of transaction, its amount, the category it should be added to, the date of the transaction, and a lot more. You could add data to the sheet manually, or maybe you want to copy and paste it from an export from your online banking account. We'll add data to this example, and I want you to see that not all fields are required. We've added the date of the transaction, the amount, whether it's income or expense, what category it should be allocated to, and then the vendor as well. But you could add other things like keywords and descriptions, or a check number. After you've added the data to your file, you'll want to download it into a CSV format. Back in Farmbrite, we're going to choose to add new records and then select our file. And we'll choose Next to get to step 2. You'll see that because we use the import template, your file column headers are already mapped to the correct Farmbrite field. Type goes to type, amount to amount, category to category, date to date, and so on. We'll scroll down and then import our file. You'll see that 3 were imported successfully. and we'll see them added here. So whether you use that method for importing your transactions or you add them individually, Farmbrite will summarize all your income and expenses into different reports. You can find some of them in the menu on the left, and you'll find others under the Reports menu. Let's take a quick look at a few of them. We'll choose the Profit and Loss statement first. This shows you all of your income and expenses based on the categories that you've assigned the transactions to for the date range that you set at the top. It defaults to the current calendar year, but you could always change this if you wanted to see it for a shorter or longer period of time. You'll see the income totaled, and then your expenses totaled, with the difference calculating a net profit. And remember from when we learned about the chart of accounts, you'll also see totals for individual categories, and then totals for any parent categories that you've created as well. The cash flow statement is very similar, except that it will start with a beginning cash balance. In this example, we're looking at the 2024 calendar year. This beginning cash balance would have been our profit from the 2023 calendar year. You could think of it like a rollover, and if you're just getting started with Farmbrite, you could always add an income transaction that was dated late last year to roll over a starting cash balance. We'll still see our total income and our total expenses with that same profit calculated and then added to our profit from last year. Next, we'll take a look at the reports section, where I want to highlight the tax summary report. This will look very similar to our profit and loss, but is based on the tax lines that you add to your categories in the chart of accounts, not the category names overall. This way, you'll group child categories together under a single tax line so that you can accurately account for them in your tax filings. Now let's go back to the accounting section and take a look at the last two options, balance sheet and budgeting. These are both fillable worksheets that you can use to help determine the current health of your business and to plan for the future. Let's take a look at each one of them, starting with the balance sheet. This is meant to compare your assets and liabilities to determine your business equity. You'll immediately see your assets shown at the top. Many of these values come from records that are already in your Farmbrite account, so they're preloaded here, but you can always add additional ones. And then as we scroll down, we'll see liabilities shown at the bottom. Generally, these things aren't tracked in Farmbrite, so you'll be able to add the values to each one of these liabilities individually. The balance sheet subtracts those liabilities from your assets to determine an owner's equity at the bottom of the sheet. This might be a good way to determine the overall health of your business, and it could also be useful to give to a creditor or a loan officer when you are applying for a loan. Let's first take a look at how you can add the values for your assets. Your cash is a total of all of your accounting transactions calculated by subtracting your expenses from your income. You can find all of these on the accounting dashboard. Then we'll look at accounts receivable, which uses any market orders that are not draft, pending approval, or canceled, and have a balance due. The total of this balance due is your accounts receivable. You can also find that under your accounts receivable report. Each piece of equipment also has an estimated value that will be used on the balance sheet. And it's important to note that this only includes equipment that you own and does not include leased equipment. And the value of your inventory is also calculated. You can find the estimated value on the right. And if you click into an individual item and edit it, you'll see an option to supply an estimated value per unit. This is multiplied by the quantity of that item that you have in your inventory to determine the total value. You can also add an estimated value on your land. We're looking at one of our fields here. We'll go under details and see the field for estimated land value. And then finally, we also have estimated values on your livestock. These are available on individual animals or set groups. Be aware that it might take up to 15 minutes for the balance sheet to reflect the values that you add to these records if you're going through and adding them now as you do the balance sheet. You might have other assets that you don't track in Farmbrite, so you can add additional rows to your balance sheet. In this example, we're adding our investments, and you'll see the amount supplied is included in your total assets. And you can delete the row if you need to as well. And since you track these liabilities outside of Farmbrite, you can update and supply the accounts payable, any loans or debt that you have, rent and taxes and utilities. And then once you've added all of the data, you can then export it to a spreadsheet file if you'd like, or you can print it both physically out of your printer or by saving it as a PDF. You'll want to make sure you either export it or save it to retain a copy of this. as all of the edits and updates that you made to the worksheet are not saved in Farmbrite. And lastly, let's learn more about budgeting. You can see that we've already created a 2024 budget. This tool helps you forecast your income and budget for expenses and allocate for each individual financial category across the months of the year. You can also compare those estimates and forecasts to actual data for transactions that you've added to your account. This helps you see how you're progressing against your estimates as the year goes on. We'll see green bars here showing us that we made more income in these categories than we had budgeted. And we'll see blue progress bars here showing us that we're under budget for these expense categories. And if you've gone over budget, you'll see a red bar. You'll also see totals in each section. We were a bit ahead on our total income, and we were a bit under our forecasted expenses. That means that our net profit was a bit higher than we anticipated. We have a little bit of surplus in case something unexpected happens. Let's take a quick look at how you can create a budget. You just saw that we've already created a 2024 budget, but you can create multiple budgets for a year to account for different scenarios. For this one, we're going to estimate our income a little bit higher and our expenses a little bit lower to represent a best case scenario. It's up to you what categories you want to track. You can choose new budget category and then see options for expense and income. The category options that are shown in this menu are directly related to the chart of accounts that you've set up. If you haven't customized the chart of accounts, the default Schedule F categories will be available for you. Maybe we want the first budget for our cattle feed. You can choose if the budget is the same for each month, or uncheck the box and add unique amounts for each month. In this example, we've budgeted a bit differently during the summer and into the fall, as we might spend less on cattle feed if our cows are grazing the fields. We can create and see that line added as a budget expense. As another quick example, we'll add one more category, this time choosing income, and use a custom category for dog food sales. In this example, our business for that doesn't really vary each month, so we'll say that the amount is the same. And you can see the uniform amount applied each month for that category, compared to the varying amount for the cattle feed expense that we saw previously. If situations change and you want to update your forecasts, you can always edit your budget here as well. Even if you forecasted the same for each month, you can still uncheck that box and change it if you need to. You can budget for as many or as few categories as you'd like. It's entirely up to you. And after creating the budget, you can export it to a spreadsheet or print it and save it as a PDF if you'd like. Thanks for taking the time to learn all about the Farmbrite accounting system with me. Don't forget to take a look through the articles in the Help Center for more in-depth details. And always feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions.